The Israel Lobby and U.S. Foreign Policy, which Professor Mearsheimer co-wrote with Stephen Walt. What has changed since you wrote that book? Is it much easier for people to criticize Israel than it was then?
Yes, and I think you can now, first of all, talk about the lobby itself in ways you couldn't back then. You can talk about the U.S.-Israeli relationship in ways you couldn't back then. And you can talk about whether or not the lobby is doing good things for Israel and for the United States or not in ways that you couldn't back then. So I think that Steve and I did have a lot of influence on the discourse. And a good number of people in the lobby have told me that over the years. But their view is that we may have had influence on the discourse, but we're not having any influence on policy. And as I said a few minutes ago, that's true. But I think the two things that have changed that really matter the most for the lobby and are not good for the lobby is that, first of all, it has to work harder than ever to defend Israel. And it's really working overtime these days. And that means it's out in the open. And lobbies don't want to operate out in the open. You want to operate in very subtle and sophisticated ways. Whether you're the National Rifle Association, the Cuba lobby, the China lobby back in the day, or the Israel lobby. But they are out in the open. Everybody can see evidence of the lobby at work. And this is not good at all. The second thing is they're not able to operate in a subtle way anymore. They're basically now engaged in what I call smash mouth politics. And if you're a lobby, I don't care whether you're the NRA again or the Cuba lobby or the Israel lobby, smash mouth politics is not the way you want to go because you're going to end up alienating lots of people. So what you have, the bottom line here is that what you have is you have a lobby that is much more exposed today than it was in 2006 when Steve and I wrote the article, in 2007 when we wrote the book. Much more exposed and is engaged in smash mouth politics in ways it certainly was not back then. So this is a real problem for the lobby. And then you can marry that to our earlier discussion of the changes that are taking place down below in the population, certainly among younger people, including many American Jews.
Right.
As you know, I like to make this point that it is a fundamental mistake to make the argument that, all Jews are in the lobby or all Jews support Israel. Nothing could be further from the truth, as was evidenced by the fact that in almost all of those college and university protests in recent months, large numbers of Jews were involved and were arrested.
Is Biden's decision to not curtail Israel, is it rational or is it ideological? In other words, he always talks about what a Zionist he is. But could he have said to Israel, "You're not going to do this," without losing the election?
I don't think so. I think in a way, Biden is in a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. He wouldn't have this problem if he was a Republican. But
Right.
as a Democrat, he has to deal with the fact that he has a large progressive element inside of the party. And there are just all sorts of people out there who are really deeply offended by what he's doing by supporting Israel. Uh, so, of course, the response to that is the best way to avoid losing that progressive vote or large chunks of that progressive vote, the best way to avoid losing the Arab American vote is to play hardball with Israel.
Right.
But if he plays hardball with Israel, the lobby will come down on him like a ton of bricks. And you can already see the Republican Party trying to take advantage of the difficult situation that Biden is in. I mean, it'll be interesting to see what Biden does when Netanyahu comes to the United States for his June 24th speech. Is Biden going to snub him, or is he going to give him a big kiss? My guess is he'll give him a big kiss, because he understands that in a close election, snubbing Netanyahu is not to his advantage. But the problem is, if he gives him a big kiss, he will end up alienating, for good reason, many progressives and many Arab Americans, and he'll risk losing the election because they won't vote.
What is Netanyahu's goal in Israel, in Palestine, in Gaza?
Well, I've never had any doubt that his goal is to ethnically cleanse Gaza. I mean, there's a lot of talk in the United States, or in the West more generally, and the Israelis purvey this line of argument, that Israel has two goals. One is to destroy Hamas, and two, to get the prisoners, or to get the people who were kidnapped back, hostages. Those are certainly two of Israel's goals. I don't deny that. But the main goal is to cleanse Gaza, and ultimately to cleanse the West Bank as well, population transfer. And the reason is twofold. First of all, it solves the apartheid problem. If you get almost all of the Palestinians out of Gaza and out of the West Bank, you can have a greater Israel that's not an apartheid state. So to solve that problem, which is a horrendous problem, Israelis fully understand that being an apartheid state is not good. They all understand what happened to South Africa. So that problem is solved. The other problem is you solve the Hamas problem. Netanyahu talks about defeating Hamas, decisively defeating Hamas. He's not going to decisively defeat Hamas. It's almost impossible. The only way he can decisively defeat Hamas is to drive the Palestinians out of Gaza, which in effect means driving Hamas out of Gaza. So he's deeply committed, in my opinion, to ethnic cleansing. And by the way, when people say that Netanyahu has no plan for what Gaza is going to look like once the shooting stops, I find this hardly surprising. Of course he has no plan, because he doesn't plan on having the Palestinians in Gaza once the shooting stops. He wants to drive them out. He doesn't want to put in place a plan for some group of Palestinians to run Gaza after the war is over with. He wants the Palestinians out. So I think that is his principal goal.
The Israeli media talked about a mass Hannibal operation on October 7th. What are your thoughts on that?
It's hard to know for sure what happened on October 7th in terms of who was killed and who killed them. We know that probably about 1,200 Israelis died, and most people believe that about 300 of them, about 1/4, were military people, soldiers, and about 900 were civilians. So I think 900 is a pretty good number to work with for a number of Israeli civilians who were killed. And the question then is, how many of those Israeli civilians were killed by the IDF, by the Israeli military? Now, there are two ways that can happen. One is with friendly fire. And you want to remember, the Israelis got caught with their pants down. They panicked. They brought in armor. They brought in tanks. And they brought in attack helicopters as well. And the tanks and the attack helicopters were shooting the place up. There's no question that they were bent on killing Hamas fighters and other Palestinian fighters for sure. But there were definitely friendly fire incidents where they inadvertently or accidentally ended up killing Israeli civilians. How many? I don't know at all, right? We don't have any numbers. But the Hannibal doctrine is a different matter, and it's a much more controversial issue. With the Hannibal doctrine, you have a situation where the Israelis who do not want hostages taken are said to purposely kill Israelis who are on the verge of becoming hostages. In other words, this isn't accidentally or inadvertently killing hostages, which is what you get with friendly fire. This is where you purposely kill Israelis, Israeli citizens. This is Israeli military forces purposely killing Israelis so that they don't become hostages. Now, everybody seems to agree that there was a Hannibal doctrine. This is called the Hannibal doctrine until about 2016. And then the Israelis did away with it. There are reports in the Israeli media. If you go to Ynet News, which is the website for the leading newspaper in Israel, there are reports that the Hannibal doctrine was put into place on October 7th. And they're not detailed reports, and there's no big study that shows that, but there are reports that that happened in a clearly legitimate news source in Israel. And furthermore, nobody has refuted that. It's not like government spokesmen have come out and said the Hannibal doctrine was not put into play. So I think there are good reasons to think that some of those 900 Israeli civilians who were killed on October 7th were killed either by friendly fire from the IDF or killed on purpose as a result of the Hannibal doctrine. But as I said at the beginning of my comments, we really have to wait until some sort of official report is done to figure out exactly what the picture looks like with regard to Israelis killing their own people.
Because we were blessed with so much time with Professor Mearsheimer, some of this will be Patreon only. So to see the full stream with Professor Mearsheimer, please become Patreon supporters.